The snap of his fingers cut through the string quartet. "Clear this table!" And the laughter that followed skittered across the marble like dropped glass. Ava Cole didn't blink, didn't hurry, just lifted her phone and said, "Imani, Clause 21, freeze anchor capital, reassign to Redwood, make the trail public." Then looked up at the woman beside him who'd said, "Investors only," and added, calm as a knife laid flat, "You just triggered a clause you never read." The room kept pretending to be a party, but security paused. A junior reporter's red record light steadied, and the tall man tried a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Who are you to move anyone's money?" he asked. Ava let the silence work for her, the condensation ring beneath his flute widening like a clock, and said, "The architect of the deal you came to toast." A soft ping in her ear, "Imani, 90 seconds. A second ping, louder this time, from pockets around the room. Heads dipped. Smiles thinned. Ava's voice didn't rise. The risk did. "Check your phone," she said, and the chandelier seemed to hum as if it knew the room would belong to someone else by the time the message finished loading. Ava Cole didn't climb by arguing with rooms. She rewired rooms so they argued with themselves, which is why Clause 21 exists. A morals trigger stitched into the final page of every term sheet she touches that says if any principal or representative publicly demeans a party to the deal, the anchor commitment freezes, escrow locks, and the capital reassigns to a pre-approved alternate without debate or delay. She wrote it the week a board usher tried to hand her a tray and she realized courtesy needs enforcement, not reminders. So she turned dignity into infrastructure and paired each clause with a standby letter from Redwood & Co. that reads like a loaded spring. Upon verified breach, we accept immediate reassignment of up to 900 malars under identical terms. Tonight, that spring fired clean. Imani's console pinged the clearing bank. The freeze flagged at Seaforth within seconds. Escrow flipped from settle to hold. Redwood's countersignature arrived time-stamped 8:44:17 p.m., and 3 board council addresses on the other side lit up with "Anchor withdrawn, convene emergency session." The tall man tried a laugh that didn't survive the first syllable. The matriarch's fingers whitened around her, clutch as she finally remembered the paragraph her lawyers had waved off as standard values language. And somewhere near the stage, a junior reporter widened her frame, catching the exact instant the party's center of gravity slid off its pedestal. "You don't have to take my word," Ava said, letting the music keep pretending it was in charge. "Take your lawyers." And the sentence worked like a key. Security stopped pretending they hadn't heard the earlier insult. A server slowed long enough to decide where respect lived, and Imani's next message rolled across Ava's screen with the clean certainty of a verdict. Freeze confirmed. "Board notices delivered," Redwood briefed. "Public ledger link ready." Ava didn't raise her tone. She let the paperwork speak, because people will argue with a voice, but they rarely argue with a wire. And when the first vibration hit a dozen, pockets at once, a notification that arrives only when a fuse reaches its end, the room finally learned why she writes clauses no one expects to need until it's already too late. "Approve Act 2? If yes, I'll move to Act 3 in the same paragraph style." The first vibration hit like a rumor catching fire. Pockets lit, smiles stalled, and the tall man tried to outrun the moment by puffing his chest. "Security, please remove her," he said, as if volume could reverse a wire. The matriarch stepped closer, pressing a manicured thumb over the QR code on Ava's badge like she could blot out a name. "This area is for investors," she repeated, slower, as if condescension were clarity. The guard hovered, unsure, eyes tracking the phones that were suddenly more important than the chandelier. Ava didn't move. "For your report," she said evenly, "you just witnessed a racial insult directed at a party to this deal. I answered by triggering Clause 21. The ledger is already moving. If you escort me out now, you'll simply be walking behind it." Another wave of alerts rolled through the room. A VP in a Navy suit whispered, then said it out loud because denial couldn't carry the distance anymore. Freeze executed. "Redwood acceptance pending." The junior reporter's stream caught the tall man's smile collapsing into something tight and colorless. "You can say fraud if it helps you breathe," Ava told him. "But the only thing pretending here was your sense of impunity." Her phone buzzed again. "Imani. Acceptance confirmed. Board council notified. Public ledger link hot." A guest read his screen and went still. They just lost the anchor, he muttered, and the sentence traveled like a draft under a door. The matriarch's chin lifted in one last show of poise that didn't reach her eyes. "This is a stunt," she said. Ava let the beat hang, then handed the moment back with a blade's edge. "Then check your phone and tell me where the money went." The guard's shoulders sank a fraction. He wasn't moving her. The party wasn't a party. It was a record being written in real time, and the next line would decide who stayed standing in it. Phones lit like fireflies after a storm, and the laughter didn't know where to land anymore. The junior reporter, Maya Chen, kept filming as she said, steady enough to be useful later. For the record, her name's on the investor roll, and that simple sentence pushed the room a half-inch toward reality. The tall man tried to ride over it. "This is theater. No one moves money at a gala," he said, but his screen disagreed, flashing a banner from Seaforth Clearing, Anchor Capital, frozen, while a second alert stacked on top, Redwood & Co. acknowledges reassignment per Clause 21. Around him, chairs whispered back from tables, the diplomatic way investors create distance. A PR handler pretending not to panic typed with both thumbs like she could text the night into behaving. The matriarch aimed for composure and landed on brittle. "Security, remove her and return the credentials," she said. But the guard's earpiece crackled with a different order, and he settled his weight as if anchoring himself to neutrality. Ava didn't chase the room. She let the paperwork do it. "You call it theater because chandeliers are prettier than clauses," she said. "But the wire doesn't care about your centerpieces." Another ping rolled the crowd like surf. Redwood's general counsel posting a confirmatory note to the public ledger. Timestamp. #transaction ID, no adjectives. Someone near the bar exhaled an oath. Someone else whispered, "She built a kill switch," and the phrase hung there, plain and accurate. The tall man looked up, the smirk scorched off his face. "You can't reallocate $1 billion without notice," he tried. "You said that in paragraph 4, Ava replied, "and then in paragraph 17 you agreed to the notice." His jaw worked at a comeback that wouldn't arrive. Maya's camera caught the matriarch pinching the bridge of her nose, the smallest tell of a person reading the contract for the first time on the worst possible night. Another wave of guests edged away from the family's orbit, and the quartet's song faltered into silence on its own, like even the musicians understood the melody had changed. "If you believe this is a bluff," Ava said, not unkindly, "keep refreshing." The guard took one step back from her path, which was the closest thing to an apology he could make in uniform, and the room, finally, listened. The family's lawyer finally fought his way to the center, breathless and late, muttering about defamation and material adverse effect. But the words landed like paper darts against steel. Ava didn't look at him first. She looked at the people who'd been told to laugh and said, "You witnessed a racial insult directed at a principal. The conduct covenant in your own term sheet calls that an immediate breach with no cure period, then turned to the counsel as if granting him office hours. You initialed it. Page 12, bottom left." He blinked at a memory he wished were a misunderstanding. "You can't call this bad faith," he tried. But his phone answered for him with the tone that means nothing good. Redwood acknowledgement posted. Escrow locked, counterparties notified, and the matriarch's lips parted without sound. Investors who'd gathered for the photo line drifted toward the exits with the careful politeness of people avoiding a spill. Others edged toward Ava, not to crowd her but to orbit whatever gravity had replaced the chandelier. "This isn't theater," she said, and the sentence was so level it felt like a ledger closing. "It's compliance." The junior reporter caught every syllable while a catering lead, voice steady now, added what the room already knew. She didn't raise her voice. They raised the stakes. Another alert swept the floor. Board members dialing in, a coalition pulling commitments, and the tall man's posture lost its scaffolding. "You're making a spectacle," he said, reaching for a dignity he hadn't offered. "I'm making a record," Ava replied, and a few heads nodded because the distinction was the whole point. Her phone hummed once more. Imani. "Independent auditors subscribe to the trail. Press has the public link. Redwood CEO on line 2 whenever you want it loud." Ava looked past the family, past the lawyer swallowing his own paragraph, and said almost gently, "You thought the room would decide what I am. The paper already decided what this is." She let that sit, then added the sentence that would follow them out of every hallway for the next year. We proceed to review. Ava didn't pitch to the room. She explained the operating system they'd just discovered the hard way. Clause 21 isn't a stunt, she said, voice steady enough to steady other people. It's governance. If a principal or their proxy publicly humiliates a party to the agreement, the conduct covenant deems it a values breach. The anchor freezes, escrow locks, capital reassigns to a pre-approved alternate, and the public ledger posts so no one can rewrite the night afterward. She'd written it after too many polite doors closed on the wrong faces and too many apologies arrived only when power was watching. Now it lived across her portfolio, the same paragraph, the same fuse. Rooms like this confuse etiquette with ethics, she added, so I wired ethics into the math. A few investors who had been drifting toward the exits paused, because math is hard to argue with. Maya Chen caught their faces softening from denial into comprehension. The family's counsel tried to salvage posture. You can't treat a single remark as material. And Ava didn't blink. The material part is you revealed the risk profile behind your judgment. If you can't respect a principle in public, you will not protect capital in private. That's why the covenant triggers without a cure period. Phones chimed again. Confirmation codes, audit subscriptions, a short note from a governance coalition endorsing the clause as best practice after repeated industry incidents. Ava let the chorus do what choruses do. This isn't personal, she said, and the words weren't a softness but a sentence. It's precedent. Imani's update slid across her screen. Auditor watching, coalition signed, Redwood CEO ready. And Ava gave the room one more line to live with. I do not argue with disrespect. I price it. Then, almost conversational to her earpiece, patch Redwood through. The shift in the air said everyone understood what came. Next would not be debate, but settlement. Ava tapped the call. Through and let the room hear the calm that decides markets. Naomi Reed, CEO of Redwood & Cobras, confirming, without adjectives, that reassigned funds were received, escrow was locked, and a values statement would post within the minute. The words were clean enough to cut. Redwood accepts pursuant to Clause 21. We do not partner with principals who humiliate parties to a deal. And as the sentence traveled, the family's counsel sagged into silence because there is no cross-examination for a ledger. Phones chimed in chorus, press alerts, governance coalitions applauding the trigger, a brokerage note sliding across screens. Anchor flight from Whitmore-affiliated vehicles anticipated. Adjust exposure before open. Investors did what investors do when risk gets a name. They moved politely and fast, chairs easing back, handshakes evaporating in the space of a headline. The guard found his voice first and aimed it where dignity belonged. Ma'am, apologies. And though Ava didn't pause to collect them, the room understood which direction respect now flowed. This isn't revenge, she said, steady as a clock. It's risk management. You revealed how you handle people, and money follows behavior. The matriarch tried one last scaffold. We can fix this. But the fix she wanted would have required yesterday, and yesterday had already been filed. Maya Chen narrated for the lens without embellishment. Clause invoked, capital moved, public audit live, and the phrase that stuck to the walls was the one Ava left them with. Let this be a policy, not a spectacle. The cameras kept rolling, but the story needed more than a room. It needed voices, people who've carried this pattern for years, to show why the clause exists and how to build a world where it never needs to fire again. The tape didn't end at the ballroom. The voices kept the night honest. The catering lead, sleeves still rolled, said what staff learned too young. People who mistake you for invisible don't get gentler when the bill is larger. And what Ava did wasn't drama. It was the first time the disrespect cost what it always should have cost. A governance attorney watching the clip on her commute called Clause 21 by its real name. A morals clause with teeth, perfectly ordinary in entertainment and sports. Rare in finance only because egos prefer etiquette to enforcement. She added that tying breaches to automatic capital movement is the difference between a value and a policy. A compliance officer wrote that he'd seen a dozen quiet versions of that ballroom at conferences where a black woman wore the wrong lanyard for someone's comfort and the right one for the deal, and that tonight gave him a template to take to his board. The security guard submitted a statement that landed like a confession. Policy had told him to protect the guest list. Training never covered what to do when the insult is the incident, and he would be rewriting his report with that in mind. Maya Chen's stream filled with teachers, nurses, coders, flight attendants, and a couple of fund managers saying the same thing in different accents. You can't steward capital if you can't steward people. Ava didn't tour the morning shows. She published the clause, a redacted template, a one-page explainer, a checklist for bystanders that reads like common sense with a spine. Document the words. Timestamp the moment, name the policy breached, place the behavior on the record, and move the decision to a system that doesn't flinch. A civil rights advocate added a truth the room needed to keep hearing after the clip stopped trending. Humiliation is not a misunderstanding. It's a management decision, and decisions change when they carry a price. The chorus wasn't applause. It was a blueprint, and it raised the next question the way good blueprints do. What shifted tonight, and what still refuses to move? 48 hours after the chandelier night, 3 things moved in plain sight: the map of money, the language of contracts, and the posture of rooms. Funds that spent the week pretending values lived on websites added a new page that actually costs something. A dozen firms asked for Ava's redacted template. 3 adopted it word for word and called it governance. Broker notes stopped saying sentiment and started saying conduct risk, which is a tidy way of admitting people are part of the balance sheet. The family's statement arrived on cue: misunderstanding, distraction, regret without nouns. But markets don't trade on adjectives, and vendors who'd watched the clip didn't either. Meetings were postponed, access was under review, and the only doors that opened for them were the ones that led back outside. Yet the old machinery kept whirring where it always does. Comment sections found synonyms for denial. Private texts hunted for a softer synonym for insult. And a few hands in quiet rooms argued the clause was too strong until someone asked them to define strong without saying comfortable. So what changed wasn't that disrespect disappeared. It was that the price tag arrived with it, right on time, right on paper. Ava didn't tour the damage. She published a one-page field guide anyone could carry into any room, document the words, timestamp the moment, name the policy, move the decision to a system that can't be shamed. And if there is no policy, ask why the capital is unprotected. Inboxes filled with stories that sounded like the chandelier but wore different uniforms. A teacher with a principal, a nurse with a surgeon, an engineer with a project lead, each one proving the point the ledger had already made. You cannot steward money if you cannot steward people. The clause didn't end a culture. It ended an illusion that there are no consequences because no one is watching. Someone is always watching now, and the next room that forgets will learn the same way this one did. Not from a speech, but from a transfer. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., the family's board will try to vote itself a softer story. Tonight, one more envelope is headed for Ava's desk. And what she does with it will tell you everything about what actually changed. By 9 the next morning, the family's board dialed into a room full of language that couldn't put the money back. Context. Misread. Distraction. While a courier slid an embossed envelope onto Ava Cole's desk as if weight could buy yesterday. She didn't open it. She wrote 12 words on her reply and sent it back the same way it came. Clause 21 triggered. No cure period. Governance review required before contact. Then she published her statement to everyone else. Not as a victory lap, but as a manual. No renegotiations after public humiliation. No back rooms for apologies without nouns. Adopt a conduct covenant with automatic remedies, or accept that capital will walk, and pinned the template. The redacted term sheet, and the one-page bystander guide for anyone who's ever been told the service hall is their entrance. Markets did what math tells them to do. Redwood stabilized, the coalition applauded, and the family's stock learned how heavy etiquette feels when it finally costs something. Ava stood at the window long enough to watch the city turn from gold to workday gray, then turned from the view to a stack of files that weren't headlines yet. The first folder read the elevator complaint. Badge logs show keycards denied to one floor more than any other. And the second read airport lounge. Members only applied differently depending on the name on the ticket. She smiled without celebration, the way people do when a plan is heavier than a moment. We don't argue with disrespect, she'd said the night before, and the line held in daylight too. We price it. If the story you just watched matters, carry the template forward, share this with someone who writes contracts, and come back for the next case, because the chandelier wasn't the last room that will learn what a clause can do when dignity finally makes it into themeth. Make dignity policy, Subscribe and share for the next video.